we're getting into a rhythm.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Climate and Environment Subcommittee meeting today on the 19th of September. At this point in time, this is being recorded, but we aren't live online yet because of some IT issues, but it will be on Facebook in due course. So welcome to this meeting. We have 3 people online, Kim, Simon and Glenn, and we have some apologies which I'll mention after we've had our council blessing. So if I can ask Councillor Coe to do our council blessing, please.
Sure. As we deliberate on the issues before us, we trust that we will reflect positively on the communities we serve. Let us all seek to be effective and just so that with courage, vision and energy we provide positive leadership in a spirit of harmony and compassion.
Thank you, Councillor Coe. So now we'll move on to apologies. I have received apologies from our Mayor, Councillor Janet Holborough and Councillor Warwick. As I said, we have 3 people online, Councillor Glenn Cooper, Kim Tahiwi, and Community Board Member Simon Black. Good morning. Now we'll move on to declarations of interest relating to any items on the agenda. Are there any declarations of interest? Thank you. So now we'll move on to public speaking time for items related.
Move and second the apologies.
Yes. So sorry, going back to the apologies, can I have a mover? Thank you, Mr. Judge and Sophie Hanford. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against, motion's carried. So now we'll move on to public speaking time for items related to matters on the agenda. So Evie Dewhurst, would you like to come up and sit at the table here and 3 minutes, and there may be some questions afterwards. Thank you.
Hello, is this working? I would like to thank you all for sitting here today and listening to me as a youth of Kapiti and for listening to my thoughts. We are currently in a moment of time where we have the ability to create a more sustainable future for the Kapiti Coast. And I would like to encourage ambitious future action plans to keep Kapiti in a better state so that we have a better sustainable future. I've currently been struggling with climate doomism for a long time, and it was a personal experience that I felt that no matter how much my individual actions take, it will never stop climate change. I was wrong to think this way. I attended KEYS, Kapiti Environmental Youth Summit, and this showed me that community and group action can make a bigger change for all-round climate change. I would like to look back on my past self and tell her to not give up hope and to make communal actions, to understand that I'm so sorry. That our communal actions can create a better future for everyone, to shape our future and take individual actions as a whole, working together, making a better future for the Kapiti Coast. We need to involve youth voices in the discussion of climate change and what actions need to be taken towards a better future for all. The policies that go through today will directly impact our future. This is why we need our voices heard and concerns heard within the discussions of the future of climate actions. I would like to see more of an effort including youth voices within meetings and discussions that shape policies within our local communities. One of which suggestions I might say is to have meetings and open the floor up to more youth that are willing to speak outside of school hours, so that we have an ability to have our voice heard outside of, which doesn't take away from our school hours and time. Thank you for having me today. I'm really sorry, I'm a bit stuttery and really nervous, but thank you. The floor is open.
Thank you very much, Evie, for coming along today, and I appreciate your passion and your commitment to this cause and for coming along today. So I'll ask, so we have a number of questions. Councillor Coe?
Sure. Firstly, thank you very much for coming along today. It's good to hear a representative of our younger population. I completely agree that we need to involve you more because you are the future, and what we do now will impact more heavily on you than it will on old people like me. Yes, look, I agree we do need to find ways to involve youth more. I just wondered if you are aware that we are setting up a kind of a think tank, particularly in the climate area, and just wondering whether there might be room for some youth voices on that group. But I guess the issue, as you rightly say, is the meetings would need to be held outside school hours so we can allow you to participate. So that's something that I think we could perhaps bear in mind. But please let us know if you think there are other ways. It's just a matter of, I guess, thinking, how we can bring that about, because I think we need to do that.
I think absolutely. I would like to be involved with think tanks, and I would like to have my voice heard in other settings. One suggestion and thought that I thought about was involving it inside lunch hours in libraries, and maybe having one person come in and have a meeting with anyone open from individual schools to join in these think tanks, which I think might be a really cool thing to do.
Thank you. So before we move on to our next question, I'm just highlighting that we are now live streaming. So we'll go on to Christian, please. Questions.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Evie, very much for coming in today. Your style of address just really was very powerful because it underlined just how sincere you are and how important these issues are to you, and how you spoke and the emotion involved really communicated that very effectively, more so than someone that you might think, goodness me, they're really polished. So you really have had an impact, and I want you to appreciate that does come across in how you present yourself. And you've sort of answered the question. I was saying earlier to Councillor Coe that she often asks the questions that I've got in mind when I press the button for the call. And that was to, beyond the think tank, which is clearly sort of limited in numbers, how could we reach out deeper into youth? Because I know that even though you're the person sat at the table today, there are many, many people behind you and how to get to. Are you sort of beyond, you're at Kapiti College?
Paparumu.
Paraparaumu, okay. So do you know how to connect into the other schools to have similar fora, so that committee members, the think tank, or however that plays out, can connect? Do you know how to do? Could you assist us with that? That's my question.
Potentially, yes. I am a part of Kapiti Coast Youth Council, which there are many people on that board from both Paparumu and Kapiti College, which even like just coming into the youth council itself, we will be happy to like talk to you guys and give our thoughts and opinions. And I can help with getting in touch with the environmental group in Kapiti College and in Paparumu College, if that is needed.
Okay. Are you aware of similar groups, say, in Otaki?
I don't have any connections in Otaki. I'm really sorry. We are trying as the youth council to reach out to them a bit more, but it's a struggle and we are working towards it.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you again.
Thank you, Christian. So we have Simon Black online.
Thanks, Evie. Thanks very much for your words this morning. Really good. We need to hear the voice of youth, and that's one thing I don't believe we have enough of over our council table. So thank you very much. Well, a couple of questions. If there were some spaces and places that the council could make available or build in future, what would that look like from your perspective?
Those being like places like Seal, which youth can meet up, or places which we can have our voices heard. Sorry.
Well, both. Maybe if the places, do you need facilities for research? Like, can we enhance our libraries, somewhere where the kids can go after school as well, to discuss topics like this, civics education or something like that?
Absolutely. I think that it's needed to have more of a discussion with everyone, which can embrace both generations. So I was thinking, instead of, we both need a space for youth, but we need a space for youth to connect with other people outside of like our little circle. And I don't think making whole new spaces would necessarily help with this sort of integration, but instead to hold like collaborative, like join with Zeal, maybe like talk to them about having open discussions there outside of school time, which anyone can join, both youth and adults, to have their voices heard. And that would help encourage connections being built with youth and the older generation, so that we can work together instead of like working separately. And because as a youth, yes, I am knowledgeable a lot of things, but I am not knowledgeable about a lot of other stuff. But I do not want to be looked down upon because I don't know things. And I want to instead be involved in the conversation, even if I can't help fully, in the sense that I don't know enough to speak on a topic. I would like to be informed of the topic so that we can at least learn together to how to make a better, like, sustainable future and groups sort of that is.
That's great. Yes, completely understand. Something like community forums where we can all come together, all ages, to discuss topics. I think that's one thing that I can hear coming from this. And also, is do you, the groups you have at the moment, like the Youth Council and the Keys Kapiti Environment Summit, the ideas coming from that, do you flow them back up to council or to other groups?
Um, the ideas coming from that specifically, there was people from council in Keys that were which was really good. They were talking about like actions and what like we want to see happen and what we do and how we can work together and what like actions that come from that. And I would assume that they come back to you guys because they came from council. However, on the youth council itself, we would just hold like meetings every Monday and we would just discuss what we have found out and what we can do from that and whether or not we want to take further actions from the
Right.
youth council. I think I haven't been on youth council for a long time, but we do come back to the council and have like what we done this year sort of stuff, and from that we will add keys in and what our findings are.
Oh, thank you very much. That's really interesting. Madam Chair, I'd suggest that we actually take some of those findings and some of that feedback and see if we can incorporate that into our meetings a bit more. But lovely. Thank you very much. Nice talking to you, Evie.
Thank you, Mr. Black, and I think there's probably a general sentiment and agreement with that. So we'll now move on to Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Evie. You can keep your microphone on if you want. I think it won't be long before you'll be around this table in some form with your passion of standing up and talking to community like this. We have a youth hui recently for some of the crime and the antisocial behaviour around this table, and I think there's probably a valid reason we should have a voice around climate and environment. Often we hear governments trying to make legislation and change behaviours of environmental practices like stop using plastic bags, and we often think that they are helpful, but they're very small little changes. What do you think are the kind of things that really should be focused on for changes in a dramatic sense for our community?
From my climate doomism, that was like last year, I had the sentiment of that individual actions such as not using plastic, and yes, it helps the environment. However, that is one person, and to put pressure on that one person to be environmentally conscious about everything is a lot of stress, and it hurts a lot. And it is, in my opinion, that we open, we give the ability to join and make a better society in the sense that we can work together, and so that it's not on the individual to be environmentally conscious. Yes, it is. However, everyone has their own ability to be environmentally conscious, as it is a privilege to actually be able to buy like the better products or to buy such and such, because that costs more money. And so I think for a bigger impact, it would be better that we work on the big corporate companies that have the products that are being sold and have like a large amount of just like waste is coming from the companies instead of the people. And I was thinking, just, yes, stop using plastic bags is a great thing, and the scale of that done because it is like mandated between everyone and it's just is how it is now, it is great. So more steps like that which can encourage like everyone to do better and be better. I'm sorry, I think I got a bit sidetracked from your question. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So we now move on to Sophie.
Cool.
Councillor Hampert.
Yeah, kia ora, Evie. Thank you so much for being with us this morning, and completely concur with Christian's comments around just your passion and your obvious dedication to ensuring that the world that we kind of are in and are on now is better for the next generation, and in making sure that we take that responsibility really seriously that we all have as kind of people who share this collective planet. So you talked a lot about kind of doomism and that eco-anxiety, climate anxiety, which I can 100% relate to. So I definitely don't think you're fully alone in that. And I know many other young people kind of staring down the barrel of what type of future we'll be inheriting. It's a scary prospect. So what do you think council can do, I guess, to counter that narrative with one that's kind of more hopeful? And how can we kind of take action that you think would instill that hope? Would you urge us to go further and faster and to focus on reducing emissions, even though a lot of people say that, you know, we're a small district and in the wider scheme of New Zealand and the world, actually we're a drop in the bucket? What would you say to people who have that kind of view of the world and view of the impact that our community can make?
I think that in a whole, everything counts, everything matters. Like, our community is like a large part of New Zealand and Aotearoa, and I believe that we have taken steps to like move towards this, but we can always do more. And it might seem, although it is small and it is just tedious to everyone who has to go by this, but I don't believe that the tedious actions that we need to take, yes, they are annoying, but our future is important. And I would like to live in a world which cares about the environment and cares about those who live here and how we can sustain and live towards a better future. And it's just be hopeful. If we don't have hope, what is there to which we can really move forward to? And I would really want to see that from council.
Awesome.
So,
And, sorry, one other really brief question.
Yeah. It's just at times.
Apologies. So obviously Kapiti is a coastal community, and there's a lot of conversation at the moment about adaptation and kind of adapting to the already locked in impacts of climate change. How much kind of conversation do you think we should be having about that versus kind of reducing the pollution in the first place and creating those sustainable systems? Where do you think the focus should be?
I think the focus should be to try our hardest to lessen the fact of that we don't need to, we need to adapt and change our ways to better the future so that we can live in a world which isn't quite doing so well. But I don't want, that just seems like we're giving up hope in the sense that we can't do anything. I believe that we should do as much as we possibly can, and no matter how much and how little that can do, I think it's worth it in like the large scheme of things. And I don't want to give up on hope, and adapting to it just seems like a way that we can be like, yes, the world sucks, but at least we're still living, but we can do an action and we can make change, and I think we should do that.
Thank you, Councillor Hanford. So we've got Kim Tahiwi online.
Kia ora, and aroha mai that I could be in there in person. My question is around engagement. We're always trying to figure out better ways to engage, in particular with our rangatahi, and we're trialling that here in Otaki, and trying to find ways that suit rangatahi. So in your experience, I suppose my question is around, I know you said you attended the climate change, and I think that was at Takapuahia in Porirua. So in the different forums you've been in, which forum or which place where you've been and you've been talking about these kaupapa is the best that you think for getting ideas? Because it may be that we need to come to that forum as opposed to you coming, or a representative coming to this forum, because I understand, that it's nerve-wracking to come into that boardroom. I've done it myself the first time, and it is it can be quite intimidating. But is there a way that you think, what form have you described? Can you describe that as best to discuss these kinds of things and get your message across where where rangatahi would feel comfortable?
I haven't actually attended many forums, like altogether. However, I believe that youth council, like everyone there, want to have their voices heard and want to take action and want to like make change. However, this is just a select few people that can make it onto the council board, which is really intimidating for me, like for everyone there. But everyone there will have really important and like have opinions which should be heard. And I think that it would be great to see more of council within youth council. And however, I think that youth council itself is a privileged group that can meet together out of like, as we are all passionate, as they all want to have their voices heard. It is like we all, it's a small amount of people that you can't necessarily reach outside of that, which should also have their voices heard. And in total, it's just hard to connect with them all around, but we should at least make efforts within schools. And I think that might be a great way to have connections with the rangitangi of Kapiti.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you, Kim. So I see that Councillor Coe has another question, but we've got Councillor Cooper online.
I just wanted to pass on some information very quickly. Is that all right?
Okay.
So, Evie, would you like to please email me, because I can work with you on this idea of connecting up with the older generation. I have a lot of contacts at that end of the spectrum. And also, so I'm chair of KEDA, who has an idea of having a thought campus, which is a mix of old and young people. I have lots of other connections as well. So if you email me, Sophie will have my email address, and I'll follow up with you on that.
Awesome.
Thank you, Councillor Coe. So, sorry, it was actually Glenn Olsen who is next rather than Glenn Cooper.
Yeah. Hey, yeah, thank you for coming in today. Yeah, it's been really interesting listening to you. I'm just wondering, from yourself as a person and from the Youth Council and the others of you, that you discussed, if we were to look at the Kapiti region, is there, one or two things that, are keeping you up at night, which you really feel that we need to focus on in this region?
Truthfully, a lot of things keep me up at night and a lot of worries. Though my main worry is truthfully the connection between generations and needing to breach that generational divide so that we can build a better future together. That is my main concern. Sometimes I don't want to think about stuff that worries me too much, otherwise it will keep me up at night longer than I expect. So I can't fully answer that question, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. No, but what you said is great. It's a great comment as to connecting, and I think that's really relevant as well. Thank you.
So thank you, Evie, for coming along and generating some really great conversation, and it's been very, very useful and poignant to hear your point of view. So I've got a couple of questions. So I know at Pauparaimu College there was a Sears group. Does that still run?
Yes.
Because I know that they've actually come along to speak to, I think, the full council previously, and I don't know sort of, what their focus is. So, that might be one channel that, because obviously they're very, very focused on the environment and climate there. So the other thing is too, just turning it around slightly, I don't know if you've looked at our agenda today, but a lot of stuff is happening all the time. And, it's really, really important to hear the youth perspective. Like, for example, I'm just looking at our agenda. So to here we're looking at the waste management and minimisation plan. That's a consultation summary. the implementation of Plan Change 2 and what effect that's going to have our environment, and our destination park. So there's stuff that's happening all the time, and it's actually, whether youth or other groups have an oversight on the general direction, or whether or not, maybe the question is whether or not you want to have direct input into some of these, these topics that are actually happening all the time. And so there are mechanisms to do that. I'm just interested on your thoughts on that.
I would like to be involved, and I think many other people would like to be involved in these mechanisms that are happening. And I'm aware that many things are happening, but I think we're on the same page here in the sense that I don't think there's a connection with the whole spectrum of ages to make the future changes, and I would like to have the youth voice heard in these discussions so that we can all work together. And yes, I can help with connecting youth with other people and to make these stuff, like all this happen. However, I do want to make it clear that it is a lot of stress on the youth to attend meetings and attend stuff, especially if it's inside school hours. So I think you should accommodate to the youth if you want to actually hear their voice.
So thank you for that too. So I suppose, so a lot of, like we as council, we ask for submissions on in fact, all of these items here. And I suppose, I don't know whether, for example, the mechanisms for getting this information out are actually getting to youth, and whether or not we need to use some of the media that actually does connect to youth, so that you're aware of these I suppose things that are happening, and so that you are aware of them, and then put plans in place, whether it's through us doing stuff or you doing stuff, so that you can actually have your say as well.
Yes. See, I was unaware of half of the stuff that you said that is on this agenda. You need to go searching for these things to know about them, especially as a youth. It might be our top priority to look into the climate action and to make change. However, it needs to be accessible to us, and it should be just an option that is there which we can take, instead of you need to go finding for this. And I think that would be great to use even just talking to the youth council and asking them to post stuff on their Instagram account, being like, hey, submissions are open for this. And that would be a great way and an easy way, which we can already do right now, to make have at least the option for youth voices to be heard.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's been a really great conversation. I think there's a lot that we can take from this. So I appreciate you coming along today, and I think this conversation will continue. So thank you again.
Thank you.
So Evie was our one and only speaker. So we'll now move on to item number 6, which is members' business. So are there any leave of absence? There are none, thank you. Matters of an urgent nature, I haven't had any brought to my attention, so there aren't any matters of an urgent nature. So now we'll move on to updates. The first update we have is on the climate change and resilience strategy and environment strategy. So I'd like to welcome Doug to come forward. And Chris, thank you. So Evie, it might be interesting, just to listen if you've got an opportunity for a while. Thank you. So who would like to?
I think if I can kick us off,
Thank you,
Jocelyn. Thank you. We have popped an update overview into the pack, and are going to step through a presentation today. And I'd just like to acknowledge that there's if you like, this is an item of two halves. In one space, we're going to be talking to you about climate change and resilience and the strategy that we've been so far talking to you about. The other half of our discussion will be on the environment strategy. So today I have with me Doug, who is going to be leaning into the first part around climate change and resilience, and Simon, who this might be your first meeting, Simon. So welcome to the table, Simon. Simon is new in the strategy and growth team, and he's bringing his expertise in strategy, but also into the environmental space. So he's going to be talking us through the environmental space, and I have Gina, who is our strategy manager, here as well. One of the things I want to put on the table is we're taking it very seriously moving into the space of these strategies, and hence why we have a few people around the table. But also just to acknowledge to you that previously, particularly in the climate change and resilience space, we have had some discussions. This is not the first time we're talking about this topic. We have action plans underway. We have implementation actions that we're progressing. And I think the opportunity and sort of lifting the conversation up slightly into the strategy space is to really create a space where we can join up some of those conversations and set out the goals and direction of travel through a longer term. And that's really what we're starting to talk to you about today. So I just want to set that scene. We've done something a little bit different in the way we've presented this item to you today as well, because in the paper we do have some recommendations, and I note this is an update, but we want to make sure that our discussion with you is actually leading us down the pathway of landing the material that will start to inform the strategy that we're developing. So we want to make sure we have a discussion with you and get your agreement to a few things. So I just want to note before we get into it that obviously we're going to talk through the content today and we're looking for your feedback. We do want to get to a stage with your feedback that we feel we're in a reasonably good shape around scope, principles and priorities for both the climate change and resilience strategy and the environment strategy. We would also like your support that our next steps include engaging our iwi partners. And the reason for that is because we are talking about issues that relate to our environment, and we'd like to recognise the role that mana whenua has as the kaitiaki for our environment, and that we think that's an important step. The reason that we've come here to talk about scope and principles and priorities is we'd like to start the conversation with our iwi partners with something on the table rather than a blank page. So that's our intention. And then just a note, in the document we will be talking about a series of steps that we are going to take to continue the conversation. So this is one of many conversations, so we won't cover everything that you're probably interested in today. I do want to note and acknowledge that going forward, once we have the strategy in place, we will be looking at what are the actions and implementation steps that will be falling out of that to deliver on what you agree is important. And also, obviously, we are setting up the think tank. We've heard from Evie today some really good feedback about engaging with youth. And I was thinking when Evie was speaking around how we might be engaging with the Youth Council and the Older Persons Council and some of the other advisory groups that we have as we go through this process as well, and thinking of how we bring that back to you. So we might be able to work with Evie and others and think about how we can do that, as well as the other things that have been put on the table from Councillor Coe around the great idea of bringing youth and older people together. So I think it might be that we can find a number of ways to do that. So I did want to pick up on that. So hopefully this works. So what are we doing today with you? I mentioned we've got the two strategies. We really want to focus on scope, priorities and principles. And the reason we want to do that is because we believe when we start engaging with other people, it's a really great way to actually get views, but also make sure we've got the right balance. So today, Councillor Henford asked a question about mitigation versus adaptation, or what's the weighting we might place on focusing on those things. We'd like to explore what is the framework or model that we have in place. And then there is a question, do you lean into prevention more? what balance do you have, and what I'd call more response actions, and making sure that as we move forward, we get the right balance in that. We're not going to land that all today, but I just wanted to put that kind of context at the beginning of this, because what we're wanting to step through with you really starts to frame the conversation that we're going to have with the community when we're consulting. It will inform the draft documents that we bring together. So that's just giving you that context really of what we're trying to achieve. I've already noted the recommendations. We are going to be developing a document that we're calling a direction of travel document. The reason we're calling it that is because, as you know, we will be taking a series of steps and engagements, particularly early next year, with the community on where we've landed with the, I'm going to call it the straw person for the strategy, which we're adding meat and bones and a bunch of things to. But we're not actually going to land the strategy until May next year. So we don't want to go out and consult on a strategy that we're still developing. We'd like the community to have a chance to inform the pieces of it before we land a product. And we think that's really important in the space because there are a lot of views on climate change, resilience and the environment, and we think it's important to take people on that journey. So that's basically the premise of what we're going to talk you through today. And when I say we, this is probably the most talking I'm going to do today. I'm going to be handing over to the rest of the team, and so we might just get into it, unless anyone's got any questions about the concept we're putting on the table today.
Looks like no.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris, and morning, everyone. Just firstly, so I'm Doug Simpson. I'm leading on the climate change and resilience strategy. I'd just like to start to echo the sentiments around the room for Evie's contribution this morning. Just really inspiring, right? Sort of reminds us why we're all here to do what we're doing in this space. I was fiercely scribbling down notes about how and what we can do more to engage and open up doors for youth. So thank you, Evie, for your contribution this morning. I've got 2 or 3 slides to talk you through on the climate change space, and then I'll hand over to Simon to talk about the environment strategy. Just as a quick refresh, though, we've been engaging. Well, I've been working with council since May, and I've had this is my 3rd climate and environment subcommittee meeting, and we had a really good session on the 18th of July with council, which most of you actually were in at that session too. So since July, we've been busying ourselves away to put together a straw man document like that Chris has been talking about for both the climate strategy and the environment strategy. And what's driving this is just a bit of a reminder that we already have a climate emergency action framework. So council already has been leading by example and doing some really good things in this space, and that the strategy provides an opportunity to pull that together along with the other work that council is doing. We have an outcomes framework, which you'll be aware of too, that we're bringing together. So both these strategies will very much talk to that outcomes framework. And of course, we've got the council 10 priorities, of which these 2 strategies come under. So we have a mandate, we have a very strong mandate, and we're acting on that mandate. So that's just a quick refresh of why we're all here. Building on that event, the council session we had on the 18th of July, I've just pulled together two summary slides of the main messages that we took away from that session. It was a fantastic session with a lot of views coming forward. So I'm just going to pull out a couple of key messages that came out from the climate table. So I was sitting at the climate table, taking views and building on what Councillor Hanford was saying around what are the focus areas, and there was a lot of conversation about realising that, look, we are already all in this climate emergency, so let's really focus on resilience. Let's get our infrastructure resilience. So we have Councillors Warwick and Wilson really making a big point around those issues. And then quite rightly, Councillor Hanford came and said, hey, that's great, that's important, but let's not forget about mitigation. We have a katianga, we have a stewardship responsibility to do what we can to reduce. So getting that balance will be key in the strategy, and we'll talk a bit about that a bit later on. And we also had Mayor Holborough talking about enabling people to live more locally and being more connected, so building on the things we're talking about this morning. And PC2 has hopefully opened up the gateway for that sort of way of moving around and allowing people to live close to where they need their services and their transport, etc. as well. Thanks, Chris. I'll go to the next one. And then we had the environment strategy, which really was talking a lot about the restoration and the protection of our environment. That's become a great focus, and the scope is very wide, and it was fairly unanimous from that discussion around that we are really talking about mountains to the sea. We have this fantastic environment that is Kapiti. It's about preserving and restoring it, but also helping our community connect better with it, to understand the role that it has and get that interconnectedness, I think, between the generations. So we have a really good opportunity there to really put our environment on the map through this separate environment strategy, and we need to make sure that the two strategies are talking to each other, and we are working through that as we are drafting. Simon and I, we've been working very closely together. There are some issues, particularly around transition, around how we're enabling people to move to more low carbon ways of living and working, but also connecting with the natural environment and protecting the areas that play a very important role in preserving our climate, like around protecting our forests and wetlands, which play a very important carbon absorption role. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about the scope, principles and priorities for the climate change and resilience strategy. Thanks, Chris. Had a lot of discussion around this, and we're trying to make sure that really the scope and the aim of the strategy is to make it very accessible, very readable. As I said, we've got a lot of action already happening. We've got our climate change action plan, which has been going for 3 years now. We've got our climate emergency action framework. So it's about putting the umbrella on top of those things and making it very accessible and allowing people to understand what we are doing. And I'm really pleased again what Evie is saying about making it accessible, making the activities that we are doing very open, because we are doing a lot of good things, but not a lot of people know about them. So it's a chance to really sort of blow our trumpet a bit about the things we're doing and how we can go further. So it's really about focus on setting the scene. Where are we now with our emissions profile, so people can understand what is the impact that we're having on our environment, and that informs the levers that we can pull to trigger action, and then setting out a roadmap of where we're going, where we need to get to, what sort of targets we need to set, what sort of ambition do we need to set, where we put the focus on, again, across those main theme areas. And if you move across, we've got our pathways, taking a sector-based approach, and I'll come to that a bit later on, with our separate action plans. So we've got those, we've got the strategy talking to not only the climate action plan, but also our recovery plan that will be coming out soon as well. So very much teeing up the work that's been delivered through those action plans. And following that through, we've got our key themes, and these have been informed by the work we're already doing. And there won't be surprises to you. These came out in the discussion on the 18th too. Our three main key themes are around mitigation, reducing our emissions, adaptation, building our resilience, preparing for a changing climate, and transition, which a lot of the discussion was around this morning, how we do this in a really just and fair way so that no one gets left behind. So we are bringing along the youth, we're bringing along elderly, we're bringing along everyone. The burdens and the opportunities are equally shared, if you like. And that's a really key thing that I'm particularly passionate about. We get that transition journey right as best we can. And then recovery is it's a new theme to the strategy, but it's not new in terms of where the focus of our priorities need to be. We've seen the impacts of Cyclone Gabrielle, and we need to be prepared. We need to make sure that we've got things in place to get our district back on track once the inevitable climate storm happens in some shape or form. So they're the sort of the key pillars which we're building our objectives around, and they're leading to fairly self-explanatory outcomes, which we discussed at the July 18 meeting. We want low carbon buildings, we want low carbon transport. These are the sort of things that success looks like. We can leverage of what others are doing. We want resilient homes, we want resilient infrastructure. So these are things that are coming out not only in that discussion, but also in the community survey that we had back in September last year. Thanks.
I just want to note, just to really reinforce for you, the column that says structure, that's what we're suggesting is going to be the core components of the strategy. Okay, so we're being clear about what will be in it, and then Doug talking through the key themes and the broad outcomes. That's really almost signposting the focus that will be coming through in the strategy. And so today, when we're talking about having a discussion with you, we're wanting to check that there isn't something you think is missing there, because it's important for us that we understand that today. So I just want to make sure we're linking it back to the strategy and where we're heading, that you have that clarity.
Thanks, Chris. I've got 2 more slides, so sorry, Madam Chair. I'm happy to take questions. 2 slides time.
Yes, questions at the end would be great, thank you.
Oh, we can come back to the slides too.
Of course. Okay, so our kāpapa, our principles. So I mentioned we already have the Climate Action Emergency Framework, which sets out some very specific principles, which I'll come to in the next slide. But we're also bringing it forward to what is the priorities now in this trinium. So our people-place partnership, coming back to Council 10 priorities, promoting the 4 well-beings, which is set by local government, applying a new outcomes framework, which I think is a really exciting opportunity to be able to do that, and leading by example, bringing out the things that we are already doing to give assurance to our community that we are already acting in this space, and we should be proud of that, I think, in doing so. But in saying that, the principles that inform the framework are very much angled around how council as an organisation are embedding climate action through everything it does. And now we have the opportunity through the strategy to really push that out and look at a much more of a district-wide focus as well. So these other principles that we've been developing are around inspiring the community response, if you like, working with communities to define and lead with us our response to climate. So being vision-led, values-based, the idea that everyone deserves a warm, dry home, for example, really getting into those core values of what people find important for living in this district. And really affordably commission the funding and support, that's key. This isn't going to be a cheap journey. It's about what we can do to actually, within the fiscal envelope and giving assurance to residents that we're not just going to hike up a whole lot of rates. We need to be innovative and looking to how we can access other funding streams beyond what we have at council. And we are already doing that. I know we are already doing that in some areas. I've talked about just transition. And then, right activity, right place. This is starting to come across, especially in the adaptation space and the managed retreat space. We've begun to have some pretty tricky conversations, but really sort of the idea of the principle that we're trying to do the best that we can, building in the right areas, protecting the right areas. Those sorts of principles are going to be really important for how we develop this strategy.
And I think one of the things I just want to add here is when we talk about affordably committing funding and support, it is not just about council. So obviously there's other key players, including the community, business and others, who will actually take a lead in some of the actions if we want to drive change. And I think there is a discussion around affordability for that wider group, and not just what the pace at which we'd like to work. And so that part of that conversation with the community and wider stakeholders really has to be about getting a common view of how we're working forward together in that space. And I do want to just note the right activity in the right place. One of the things that we did talk about in terms of managed retreat, Councillor Hanford brought up earlier the coastal space. We have a separate conversation underway through Take a Tai Kapiti around that, which today we wouldn't be wanting to bring to the table. Committees and council will be getting a report back from our panel on the opportunities, including the timing of some of these conversations as well, because just in case anyone's listening, I just want to make it clear that we're by no means suggesting managed retreat is something that we're focused on today, but it is a future generation conversation, I think, and what supports or mechanisms we might want to put in place along the way might be part of that conversation, but we're definitely not proposing that we're right in the middle of that conversation today.
Thanks, Chris. Yes. Okay, and then this is just for presentation really mainly, just to illustrate that the principles which are already on the website for the Climate Action Emergency Framework, they will be closely followed, and it obviously includes our responsibility to honour our principles and guidance for under the Te Ture o Waitangi and our partnership with Mana Whenua. That's something that's really key to make sure that we are doing this work in a real partnership-based way throughout the whole consultation journey as well. Thanks, Chris. Last slide. So the last ones are really around what our priorities are, and again, these have been informed from these previous discussions. I mentioned the July 18 meeting. I mentioned our community survey from last September and internal discussion with colleagues. So the idea is now, next, later. Our focus for the next triennium, and this will be set out and connected with the long-term plan as well, is we are building capacity within the organisation to embed climate thinking through everything we do, so whether it be our asset management plans, through our district plan making, through all our council decisions and our report writing. That is already happening, so it's around building around that to make sure everyone knows what they're doing to embed climate action through their work. Setting our ambition, getting our targets out there, seeing what people are prepared to sign up to, if you like, both for council in terms of its own corporate emissions, but also district-wide, and setting out a pathway to how we can deliver on whatever target we set. And then ramping up our activities. So we already have some existing, we have 5 emission reduction projects that are underway, and also infrastructure projects that are underway as well, ramping up and delivering on those projects that have been already through the budget process. And then really just moving on, the idea that we're sort of looking to, we're future-proofing our districts. The idea we're starting to have a particular focus on transport. You'll see our emissions profile from the last year. Transport is our biggest emission area. That is going to be, not surprisingly, a massive area of focus for us. We need to get that down. The average for the country is about 25%. So that's a real opportunity for us. So there will be a focus on transport and getting people to get out and using more public transport, walking and cycling, and to try and break their habit with car use where it's not, where there's some other opportunities to engage in that space. Phasing out fossil fuels, there already has been some ambition around to do this, and we're already seeing some of this work happening at some of our council assets with Otaki and Waikanae Pool moving away from gas. So what else can we do within our gift to move away from fossil fuels and lead by example? Building resilient infrastructure, and really that includes the ability to connect our communities better through more resilient infrastructure, whether it be living locally, and again, talking about the right activity in the right place. And then the mindset, this is a systems change, this is a mindset change we need, and it brings in the idea around our transition not only to a low carbon economy, but also a circular economy, an economy which is more responsible, uses resources in a more responsible and efficient way, but also brings forward new opportunities for low carbon businesses as well. The idea that we can actually attract some very innovative businesses that are actually using materials and make them available back out into our community. We don't always have to have brand new materials, and really sort of trying to change that mindset that we can still have access to the services that our products provide, but we don't always need to necessarily own them or have them brand new. And that's a conversation, that's a philosophy conversation that's probably for another time, but it gives us the opportunity to bring through that circular economy mindset as well, and preparing ourselves for inevitable climate change as well. And the last one was really about future thinking. What does success look like in the future? We're living well locally. We've got we're living in developments which are better connected to our transport nodes, to our amenities. People are able to access them easily through walking, cycling. So futuristically, you can imagine what it would be like for living in this space. And we have high growth but low carbon industry. The idea that we're helping those industry move to more low carbon practices, but again attracting more organisations. We've seen a bit of that happen with the Otaki Clean Tech Cluster Hub as well, looking to build on those initiatives to make it more mainstream across the region, across the district. And then we've spoken a bit about recovery. We are in a position to build back better after major climate events. We are prepared. We have those MOUs. We have those understandings with our partners. So that's all down packed before when things happen. But again, that detail will be in a recovery plan. But we're giving our nod to that work as being important in that space.
Yeah, I just want to add, we aren't in any way trying to predict when there will be major events. So I do want to put it on the table. So at the moment, we have it under the Build Back Better under 2033 to 2050. But you've heard Doug say what we're talking about is being prepared for that so that we can have those plans and things in place. Not that we're predicting when things will happen. So I just want to table that point. And I think the other one is around living well locally, given some of the conversations we've had around PC2 and some of the balance that we want to maintain in our district, I just want to note that from a climate change and resilience perspective, talking about making best use of dense developments to help with that connection doesn't mean that there won't be other priorities to ensure that we have the right mix and balance in our district, and we will be continuing those conversations just in case that's something that's hit top of mind. So we do understand that balance. And I'll stop and I might shoot back to Scope and hand over to the Chair for questions.
So thank you, Chris and Doug. I'm just wondering, so I see that in the presentation there's also the climate part of it, and whether, I assume that Simon is going to be speaking to that?
The environment part, yes.
Whether we do that now as well.
Okay, great.
Yes,
Okay.
please. Sorry, the environment bit.
Yeah.
Sorry, environment.
So as I understand from the Chair, that we'll do the whole presentation and then come back through. Yep, that sounds great. Simon.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Doug. Kia ora koutou, everyone. Pleasure to be here. So, yeah, if we could just flick to the next slide. So the purpose here, we're talking about the broader environment strategy. So as Doug's mentioned, we'll be looking to integrate these as much as possible, have them talk to one another. But there's a lot going on in the environment space, clearly. Lots of different government levels of government with responsibilities and in a changing scene as well. We have, obviously, businesses and local communities have a significant role to play in addressing environmental challenges. So in scoping up the environment strategy, it's important to look at what pathways or capacities there are of council in affecting change. So that's, I suppose, one way of understanding what opportunities there are for council to engage in that space. And here on the left-hand side, you can see there we're looking at, there's planning and policy, asset management responsibilities, service delivery, those sorts of things. So there's a range of different activities that council can engage. In terms of the scope, so really we're talking about the environment fairly broadly defined. So natural systems, their interactions with human health and well-being. And what we're looking to do here is to relate the broad-scale environmental policy and context to the local level. So given there's a lot happening in this space, it's important to understand, particularly when we put documents out into the community, where council sits, where those opportunities are, and looking at where the pieces fit together, where those opportunities are for action. But fundamentally, it's also important to reflect local community concerns, outcomes, and priorities in that space. So, but focusing in areas where council has particular responsibilities, knowledge or expertise, or a role to play in areas such as advocacy to other levels of government. So as a part of that, it will also involve outlining where those other responsibilities lie and understanding the context with which council is operating. In terms of the sort of the key priorities for the strategy, here again it's in really early stages, but you could call these sort of key themes, having a look at that context. There's obviously Te Mana o Te Wai, so fresh water, Indigenous biodiversity, coastal waters and estuaries, productive land use, blue-green infrastructure, so that's where we're talking about urban infrastructure, so plants are the green bits, the water's the blue bits, and linking that back to the environmental basis of human health. So those are the key themes we're interested in getting to see whether that's within scope for the council's understanding, with obviously the objective of achieving a set of outcomes. And there in the environment space, in a combination with these priorities, we're sort of hoping that we'll cover all bases. Again, keen for feedback. So the outcomes here in terms of environment, obviously environment plays a significant role for well-being, human health generally speaking, and spiritual well-being. So that's really linked to sense of place. And obviously environmental health is a fundamental need and challenge at the moment. Resource use and sustainable for future generations. Clearly that's an outcome that speaks to much what's been discussed already this morning. Outstanding natural landscapes, so that's about significant landscapes, Kapiti Island, the coastal escarpment, general systems, that sort of thing. Obviously the achievement of these other outcomes needs to reflect opportunities within the built environment to be low impact and livable at the same time. And also linking to the climate strategy around resilience to natural hazards.
I do just want to make the note of the distinction between climate change and the environment that we're making, being the environment is obviously covering all the things that you would see in our outcomes framework around place and how well it's been maintained, and I guess how much we can engage with it in a meaningful, important and productive way. The climate change and resilience space is looking at how we're preventing, responding to the change that we're seeing in our climate. So it's got a slightly different flavour to it. And I want to make that clear. So in one space, we are saying we need to focus on place and protect, maintain, and you're going to talk about some of those principles shortly. And the other space, it is talking about how we're actually managing, responding, preventing the implications of what we're seeing in the change of the world that we live in. So they have distinctly different focuses, and we've deliberately taken that perspective because we were concerned that to merge them in, one might overtake the focus of the other. And so I just wanted to put that out there now.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, next one. So principles. So these are, I suppose, the guiding elements of the strategy as to how council goes about its actions and responding. So obviously protecting and restoring natural systems and ecosystem services is pretty fundamental to those objectives. Providing leadership and positive, pragmatic and proactive. So that's about being positive. I think it's an important point that was made this morning by Ellie. So it's a really important function of council in really leading and pulling together, providing opportunities for collaboration, because as much as council is obviously responsible for a fair amount of environmental responsibilities, a lot of the achievement of that stuff requires other parties, and therefore council needs to provide both a leadership and a collaborative role, which really actually comes to the next point about support. And then resilience clearly is a big piece that's already been discussed. So those are those broad principles, and again, open to any sort of comment on that. And within these, again, these priority themes, which are around water, biodiversity, coastal, productive land use, the interactions with blue-green infrastructure, and the environmental basis of human health being those sort of key elements of a strategy at this point. So I think that's pretty much all they had, really.
It is. I might hand back to the chair.
So thank you very much, Chris, Simon and Doug, for a very comprehensive presentation. So now we have a paper in front of us. We have 6 recommendations. So I would like to, and just to start off with, just to ask for questions only on clarification or on the paper we have in front of us, please. So first of all, I'll move on to Councillor Coe.
Yeah, if you could just flick back to the outcomes slide. Oh, yeah, you've got it there. Yeah, so I guess what's going through my mind is there's a whole lot of critical success factors or key success factors that will determine our ability to achieve those outcomes. And I'm just wondering how we're picking up on those, because there's a whole lot of interdependencies as well. So, for example, if we take transport, I mean, one of the things we've talked about is having transport included as something we keep an eye on within this committee, so it becomes the Climate, Environment and Transport Committee, because it is so critical to the achievement of our outcomes. And
we have the question, please.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how we can include that, and also how we can include things like education and awareness, which is another key success factor. So have we thought about what some of those key success factors are and what the interdependencies are in order to achieve those outcomes, and how are we going to measure the outcomes? So I guess I'm just asking if we can...
If I may, just step in first to say, they're great points to pick up on. I think our next conversation with you around pathways is going to unpack what you're talking about, Councillor Coe. So underneath the broad outcomes, link back to the themes that we're taking, will effectively be setting out some actions, or I need to say this the right way, the pathways that we think we could take to drive change. So what the levers are to drive change. And we'd be saying to you, if I pick mitigation and the low carbon energy, transport, buildings and infrastructure, here's a pathway we could take, the levers we think we could pull that would help drive this change. That'll be the next step we come back with, because today we aren't talking about targets, but we will be coming back to say to you,
Right.
We know that you want to set an emissions reduction target. We've stated that publicly. We believe that you will need to look in these broad outcomes at what shifts you want to see there that will help you achieve that change in those targets. So we'll be coming back to you with that detail in our next conversation.
Okay, cool. And my second point is in regards to the environment one, productive land use. I know that the Economic Development Kotahitanga Board is very, very interested in productive land use, and I just wonder if we are connecting with their initiatives in that area. And I think there's particularly an iwi component to that as well in terms of productive use of some of the iwi-owned land. So
Again, a great point, and I think as we get into our consultation, we'll definitely be engaging with the Economic Development Kotahitanga Board, and we're seeking your agreement today to make sure that we're having the right conversation with the iwi, so that is part of our next step. So, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Coe. Mr Judge.
Thank you. I've written out 3 specific questions.
Excellent.
Hopefully this
Thank
is
you.
going to go well. So the first one is, what specifically has been done to apply a strategic climate lens to the speed management plan process with regard to taking enabling actions such as setting speed limits to enable an increase in journeys undertaking active modes? Shall I ask all 3 now? Or?
I think we'll just take one at a time.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think maybe what I would say to that question is we weren't anticipating focusing on specific actions or initiatives that we have underway today. We can take that question back. I'm looking at Sean as to whether he wants to respond today, or we can come back. So we weren't intending to get into a specific conversation about initiatives today. Are you pushing your buttons, Sean? He is.
Mr Mellon.
Yes. What, could you just repeat the question?
Okay, so in the briefing, you mentioned that there's like a whole of council approach, and you apply a climate lens across all the work that it does in sort of impacted areas. So the question was, how has that been applied with regard to the current work that's being done on the speed management plans?
Okay, maybe I can start off this and then I can hand to Sean. I think what we're presenting on the table today is we're saying to you first, this is the scope, principles and priorities that we think would be valuable to be setting in these strategies. These strategies, once we set them, are going to sit across the work that's happening in the organisation to create some alignment and synergy. We are and will be talking across the organisation about how our respective initiatives that might currently be underway or might be new help to deliver and drive change in the things that you're setting through the strategy. This is our first conversation with you. We definitely have not had the opportunity to go right across the organisation of current things that are underway and try and line them up. What we need to have this conversation with you first to say, is this what you want to see? And then we'll be coming back to you. So unfortunately, there is a bit of a timing issue with, there is things underway now. I think there is an intention, and we're saying to you, this is what we will be doing. So it's a journey, is what I'm going to say, we'll put on the table. Did you have any further thoughts on that, Sean?
Yeah, so actually I'm just wondering whether, because it is getting into the detail, I wonder whether Mr Judge can have a conversation with Mr Mellon. And so if we could just park it in the meantime, and if you could move on to the next question, be great. Next question, please.
Okay. Will there be scope to look at the levers we can pull with regard to consenting fees around encouraging people to have, say, zero carbon development as opposed to fossil fuel intensive development? Is that one of the things that we could look at?
I think would be. First, I think there'd be a conversation about the district plan and the rules and settings we have in play around some of those things. And then secondly, it might be how we apply it in our resource consent zone. James has some additional thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I think the other part of that puzzle, Christian, is lining up to national legislation, which is requiring, we don't have the detail yet, but requiring low carbon buildings, those things, and actually fees for different construction types. So that will cascade down when we get a bit more, I think. But it is a policy, it is a policy lever that you will need to consider in future plan changes.
So thank you for that question. I have a few thoughts around the district plan as well, but I'll leave those in the meantime. So I think you have one.
Yeah,
further
one more
question.
was.
Thank you.
So this committee in the past has had emissions reductions plans presented to it with actions and timelines that appear fixed. So, and we've also passed resolutions around this table that, to me, indicate that we would like to go further and faster. So will this strategy actually be a way for this committee to work with officials to go further and faster compared to what's already been presented to us as the plan?
And I think that's a really great question. I think what we are wanting to put on the table is a collective set of strategies that in our new strategic architecture we've been talking to you about are our operating strategies. I think part of the conversation we need to have is the balance that we're placing on our priority and pace around climate change resilience, the environment, health, housing, and what's the other one I'm missing, guys? Oh, thank you. How could I forget that? Economic development. I'm sitting right next to Councillor Coe. And economic development. And those strategies actually have some interconnectedness and interdependencies, but I think across that mix, we need to make sure that we have the right balance and we're understanding how the levers that we're pulling are working together and are hopefully not in tension with each other, so that we can set across that space some aspirational, but also stakes in the ground of what we want to achieve and when. So I'll say underneath the climate change and resilience and the environment strategy, we will be wanting to say cohesively, here's what we're up to. You've said this is what you want to achieve. Here's some pathways and the levers you pull and what it will take. So we will need to come back to you and talk about how it falls out in our LTP and what the opportunities are. So there'll be consecutive steps in this process to make sure that we've got a comprehensive view of what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Mr. Judge. So we'll move on to Councillor Hanford now.
Yep, I've got a couple of questions, but I'll try to keep them nice and succinct. So just here on structure, where we've got separate action plan, would that be the same thing as the implementation plan, or is there a separate implementation plan under that action plan?
So the way that we've looked at this, and we'll be coming back to you, is conceivably under mitigation, adaptation, transition and recovery, it may be in places that we've got a combined plan. It may be that underneath the strategy there's several plans that link up to it. You will have seen in our strategic architecture, we're also acknowledging that there may be supporting strategies that link up underneath that. We would be mapping that out so it's really clear how what we currently have in place transitions to support the achievement of the strategy. We do need to identify where the gaps are and what's currently underway. Some of you have already talked to us about there are gaps, and we want to have undertaken those steps to come back and say, here's what you want to achieve, this is what we have underway now. There are some gap areas that would be the next focus that we're bringing in. So Doug had mentioned that we have a lot of good work underway. We do not want to discount that we've already got a lot of things in traction. It's how do we bring that together so that there's a cohesive piece.
Cool, that's awesome. And that kind of leads on to the next question around what considerations being given to lining up both the time frame in terms of the development of the strategy, but then what flows out of that in terms of the action plan with the long-term plan. Like, how do those two things talk to each other as well? Because as Doug mentioned, there's a cost to acting, but there's also a massive cost to a lack of action. So how do we line this up with the long-term plan and also reflect that cost of inaction as well?
I'll say there's two main mechanisms for this. With the work that's already underway, and the fact that, for example, we've already talked about the organisation and emissions reduction, and we are looking at things like the district emission space. We are concurrently looking at some things we think we can do now. Cool. If you like it, you can say that we're focused at the moment on some of the quick wins or low-hanging fruit that we know we could do right now. With what we bring back to you, though, we're acknowledging there may be other things that you agree we need to do and work with others on. So we will be putting in a bit of a placeholder to go. There is some space where we know we might want to undertake some action. We might need to continue to work through that, though. So we've been conservative in that space, but acknowledging there's the two zones. So this is going to be a story that goes across many LTPs. It isn't it has to hit this LTP, otherwise we've missed. Yeah. So we're acknowledging we're starting, but we're actually going to create a pathway that looks out to 2060. So we can go, these are the levers that we think we need to pull, and start to build a bit of picture of how much it actually costs over time, not just in a 3-year stint that we're intensely focused on. So that's what we think we're building with you.
Yeah, cool. And just in terms of the structure that you've got there with those kind of four, I support them as kind of 4 key elements to the structure. Will they be worked through kind of iteratively, like the scene setting will be done first, and then based off of that, you'll come back to us and we'll set the district-wide target, and then after that we'll endorse the pathways, or will they all be kind of landed at once?
We are working on this material at the moment. So I'm going to say in the background we're doing a bit of concurrent work. However, our proposition is that we'd like to come and talk to you. The way that we've managed, obviously, just even getting to the starting point of this is we'd like to do some deep dives with you so you have a chance to actually have a look at our early thinking, and then we'll be bringing it back to the table and sequentially moving through those things. I just want to note that there's a lot of, in my view anyway, there needs to be connection between these conversations. So the levers and pathways and the targets that we set, that there's connection between that. And actually Councillor Coe had brought that up in her query around, how does the broad outcomes link back to our themes and things we're doing. We'd like to bring that back to you so that when we are setting something down in place, we're really clear about what we know we can do and what we can't do, or where the gaps are. So I do want to acknowledge there are going to be gaps. We are going to have to do more work, and that's because we won't necessarily have the answer to everything. That doesn't mean that we can't set an aspirational target. It's just acknowledging we might say we're 50% of the way there. We need to try and work out this bit. And so we'd be continuing to have a conversation with you about that. So we won't get to May and go, we've solved world peace, we've done it all. That is not going to happen. So I just want to manage that expectation now. We are going to have an iterative conversation with you. And maybe I feel quite confident saying if somebody had already cracked this nut, we wouldn't be having these conversations. We'd just use what someone else had done and everything would be solved. So we know we're not there, and we're not going to pretend that's the case, but we do know we need to keep having the conversation with you and the community to make sure that the pace at which we're operating, everybody's feeling like it's the right one for this community.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. And I think there is, notably quite a clear mandate from the table to provide, that scope that does go far and fast, recognising how important the climate crisis is. Sorry, a couple brief points on the environment side of things.
Actually, questions, please.
Oh, they are questions,
Okay.
yeah. So where does the health of the soil fit into the priorities of the environment strategy? Yeah, that would be where you'd imagine that be reflected.
Sorry. I think it is productive land, but I think the point of this is there is interconnectedness between these, and Simon was mentioning that. So I think as we explore this together more, if we want to look at the quality of soil and make sure that we've got the right focus in the right place, that's where we can say around measures and focus. I think it'll be important to make sure that we land that through this process. So one of the things that I think, even through the Kapiti Whaitua process that is already underway, is this is where I think there's a great opportunity to be engaging with our iwi partners on some of the, I'm going to say it's more locally focused measures that they are undertaking to understand the quality of the environment, and particularly in the water space, they've been doing a lot of great measurement that I think we could be thinking about how do we line that up in this space. And it would be the same with soil, is what can we really focus on at a local level to understand that.
So I wonder if it's even possible then under pathways and capacities to reference partnership with Mana Whenua, because I think that is a great way to both grow kind of our district's capacity in terms of looking after the taiao, but playing that role. So I'll leave it there.
No, fantastic. We can add that in. I think that's a great addition.
So if I can make a comment about that in relation to being on the Whaitua process, and I suppose this is my view anyway, that the health of our land will affect the health of our water, and they're very interconnected, which also relates to climate change as well. So, you know, there's a lot of interconnectivities here, and I think it's good to have two separate strategies, but there are an awful lot of interconnections. Thank you. So now we'll move on to Mr. Sutton. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, and I think you succeeded in your stated brief to make this understandable, a complex process. So I compliment you on that. 3 questions, and the first is editorial. You say the managed retreat is reflected in there a couple of times, and I know that that's what's being talked about, but there's a process going on, and I wonder whether that language could be mediated a little bit to not take one of the specific strategies or one of the specific pathways that will be used. I say that not because I've got a particular view on it, but I know how incendiary that phrase is in the community at the moment. So it's an editorial comment, and I don't ask you to respond to that.
I would like to say we accept that point, which is why I made my comment at the beginning of this, just to note. Yeah, so happy to do that, because as you say, we all know that there's about 5 different pathways we could take and are looking at, so we'll accept that point. Thank you.
The other editorial is around the word self-sufficiency and self-reliance. And I wonder whether self-sufficiency, and this is a question, Madam Chair, I wonder whether self-sufficiency is what we are aiming for within a council document. Is it not self-reliance? Self-sufficiency is about individual action to be an island, if you like. And really what we are trying to promote as a council is not just that strength of individual, but strength of community. So I had a real question about the use of self-sufficiency, particularly throughout the document. I'll put my other 2 questions there quite quick. On the scope, finance is not part of the scope. And I understand that we're not a finance committee, but these are long-term issues that we are dealing with. This is 50, 60, 100 years, and they are going to be expensive, as you say. But isn't now the time also to be thinking about long-term financing mechanisms? Because we know this is coming, but we say we do our financing planning in 3-year, or as you say, multi-3-year cycles. But wouldn't it be useful to be flagging that as part of the scope for this work, so that we are able to move forward with some more confidence?
Can I comment on that and say...
I can put my last question, it's really quick.
No, I think it's easier for me to take them one by one. I just want to say, number one, when we talk about the pathways we're bringing back to say, here's some levers you can pull, on one side of the equation, we're wanting to say, it will be ballpark figures, but this is how big we think it could be, so that we're giving a sense of size. I think we haven't specifically put it into this, but could if it's something that this group, this committee thinks is important. On the other side of this, we are actually progressing conversations across council, which we will be bringing through around, I'm going to say, as the revenue stream side of things, and the fact that we know some of these things are going to be costly, and we need to start having a conversation about what else do we need to do? What other revenue streams or things do we need to focus on to make sure that we can actually manage this conversation? So take your point, we just had not specifically put it into here, but happy to take feedback if you think that's important for these strategies.
And so my question is, would it be useful to put it in here to help that discussion? My third one is on principles, and under the environment one, we talk about leading and principles, and I don't know, and just reflecting on the questions that have come and the discussion that we've had, should we also have in there the word ambitious under lead? Because I think that is the view of this committee, and it's already been referenced in the questions this morning. Would we not want to, as a council, be ambitious in our leadership? Thank you very much.
Happy to take that point. I think we have heard that around the table today. And I think we would note as we progress that that was one of the points of feedback that's come from this table.
Doug.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Just very quickly on some of the 2 points you said. Thanks, Tim. Around self-sufficiency, and just to use an example from the interactive briefing, that theme very much came around the idea that we can look after ourselves. So it does cut across self-reliance, and the idea of having some land available for food production, for example, make sure we've got something around that. That was a key point around that. But it also could also include around energy generation. We're talking about having more low carbon, local renewable energy. What can be done to look across our portfolio, perhaps, or major landowners to look at opportunities for that? So just a couple of examples of where that came from. But also with on the finance side, yeah, I think there's an implied scope there. Talked about earlier around that we need to sort of set out some other ways we can fund this big change, and it is going to be an iterative process. I just wanted to restate that principle. Thank you.
So thank you. So now we'll move on to Mr. Black, who's online, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora tātou all. Hey, thanks very much for this report. Absolutely loving it. The fact that we're getting in early and having these strategies and frameworks being put in place is excellent. My questions are around that page 14. I noticed that we've got mitigation, transition. My questions are around the whole cyclic economy, a holistic view of things. So, for example, a couple of examples I've got is sourcing EV cars and disposal of batteries. Also, let's say plastic playground fixtures and stuff like that. They've got a life cycle. What I want us to think about is actually the whole life cycle, where these resources have been sourced in the world, whether they've been sourced sustainably, and also how do we dispose of them at end of life. And I think the big examples coming to mind is like plastic bags being shipped off to Malaysia and they're just burning them in their backyard, and we go, well, it's out of our hands because we don't have legislation to cover that. So how are we bringing in the holistic, end-to-end life cycle of things we do in our plans and our council?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Simon. So yeah, absolutely. The strategy gives us a chance to introduce the circular economy to our community, and also a chance for council to show what that looks like in terms of its own operations. So where council is already looking at work to look at across its own value chain, its own supply chain, to ask those quite tricky questions. What are you doing with materials once you build a playground? If you have to decommission it, where do those materials go? We can start to ask those questions and get some responsibility or extended responsibility along those contracts. So very much opening the door to try and build in that good practice. But I think also gives us a chance to build on the existing activities and platforms in our community that are helping local people to reuse, to share, to repurpose more. So we've got examples like the Raumati Repair Cafe and Otaki Energize. We already have some really good enablers on the ground that are helping residents to live more circular lifestyles, if you like. So we're building on very much, as I see it, around what we can do as council to promote that more circular way of working and being, but also to give a platform and to support our local people out in the community that are helping our community to be more responsible and think about more life cycle living, if you like. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That leads on to my next question is around communication, which I believe we could probably enhance a bit more in our frameworks. Things like what Eva was saying today, about communication. How are we going to communicate to people how to live more sustainably? How are we getting feedback from our communities? How are we doing research and development and communicating that? And also advocacy, if there's things we can't change, like national government policy, that, why are we still importing styrofoam, which we can't dispose of? How is this being enhanced in our framework?
Thanks, Simon. I thought I might say that I think the steps that you're talking about, I think, are connected to part of our implementation plans that are underway. So SLT just heard this week around effectively the communication / education, I don't want to call it campaign, but approach around some of these things. And so that will be coming back to the table. So we, in the strategy itself, wouldn't be setting out how that works. We'd be acknowledging it as a key lever of something we need to do, and that would be coming through in our implementation actions. That, and as I mentioned earlier, some of them are already underway. We're ahead of the game, which is a bit exciting. Really important point, and it will be coming back to this table.
That's great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Simon. So we have Glenn Cooper who's online for questions, please.
Yeah, hi. Could you just flick to, great conversation, everyone, quite enjoying it. Can you just flick to the principles, just a question about the principles. One of the principles around, other principles, vision, lead, values based, everyone deserves a warm, dry, safe home. And bearing in mind, we're not the Sustainability Committee, we're the Environment Committee. It just occurred to me that that principle was maybe conflicting with some of our outcomes. You know, if we go, for example, concrete houses are really warm and dry and safe, that would sort of be in contrast to good environmental thinking. So it's just a question. Do we think that that's the right principle? Everyone deserves a warm, dry, safe home? Or should we be looking at a principle around eco-sustainability, environmentally friendly housing that's fit for purpose or something?
I think what I might say is that's a great point to raise, and we might take that back to base and look at those principles and see if we can't ensure that we've framed it in that way, because I think the intention is under the climate change and environment strategies that we would be very focused on making sure that we're applying those kinds of practices. So that might be in how we achieve it, but we'll see if we can reword that to take that kind of context into place, Glenn.
Yeah, it's awesome just because the principles are the principles, right? And that's what everything else sort of pivots off. So awesome, thank you. Good conversations, enjoying it. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. So now we move to Glenn Olsen. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, staying on this slide, if we look at sustainability, which is what this is about, and pretty much all of what council should be about at the moment, and building on Tim's one of his questions is that sustainability is made up of three aspects, well-defined aspects. So one of them is, of course, the environment, one of them is called humanity, and the other one, of course, is economical. If I look at this in our the strategic and corporate principles, we've got two of those in there, and other, we've got the third one has been put under other, which is affordability. Why would affordability be degraded to other principle, a secondary principle, where it should really be with the other ones as a primary principle? Because there's nothing that this council will do, nothing we will do or any other one, if it's not affordable for our ratepayers.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. I would say that the reference to people, place and partnership and the economic donut model that we've put in the middle of the table and that we are applying has the concept of sustainable development at its heart. So in there is economic development, is the environment, and is the social elements of a community being able to provide what I'm going to say the basic necessities of life for people, as well as some others. So it's in there, and maybe when we come back to you, we can make sure that we've referenced that, because that is a really fundamental point and critical to what we're doing. I think the piece on affordability wasn't to try and downplay the economic side of that. I think it was to acknowledge that as we are trying to push forward with our pathways and our levers, that even that needs to be in an affordable and sustainable way as well. So that's what we were trying to get, that balance of if we were to make some assessments around priority, some of the criteria that we would put on the table in addition to sustainable development points is around cost and benefit from it, and doability. So over time, you can't do everything. You're going to have to pick what's most important to progress. So we will be coming back and talking to you about that. We think it's important to put that principle up there now so that when it comes back through, it's not a surprise.
Thank you, Glenn. So the last person who has questions, we've got Kim Tahiri online. Is she still there?
Kia ora.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question is just around engagement with mana whenua. I notice on page 6 that it says the first hui is going to be in October and also plans to take this to whakaminenga at the end of October. Just a couple of things. We've got a phrase that we use that we say nothing about us without us. And what that basically means is if this is something that we that affects us, then you discuss it with us, which is obviously what you're trying to do. But I'm just mindful that TWOC is a governance group, and this would likely need input from operations and like a layer of technical expertise that would probably benefit from being included in the whole discussion. Given the time frames, because we've got treaty hearings, well, Ngahapu has treaty hearings coming up the first week of October and probably the last week of November. And not to slow the process, but I just think it's important to recognise that, in fact, if we take this, like normally what happens is we take this paper, we bring it here, if we take it to TWOC, then TWOC representatives have to then take it back to technical experts. Ideally, it would be best if when the paper got before TWOC, our technical iwi experts had already been involved. Because I note a couple of the things in there like Te Manawa Te Wai, land use, obviously we're already involved in through the Economic Development Board, but through our own work. Just signalling maybe that we need to approach that a bit differently. Not saying we don't take it to TWOC, but maybe we make a bit more of a, we figure out how we can get that input in there before these things land on the table. Understanding that you're just trying to not go with a blank piece of paper. But yeah, just mindful that it's better if it's already seen by the iwi experts before it hits the tables, if we can try and manage that somehow. I suppose that's less of a question and more of a comment.
Thanks, Kim. I might note that we have been having some conversations with Hara. Obviously, you know, she's our GM at iwi Partnerships, but just to take for everyone else, our GM at iwi Partnerships, around the best way to essentially push this through that process. So happy to take that offline with you and have a chat about how we can make that work, even if it means that we have an initial conversation at TWOC to note that the work's underway and we are working, for example, with the Teo units, and then we come in November with an update. Happy to work that through.
Yeah, no, I would appreciate if we took that offline, because sometimes I'm not sure what's happening in terms of people that sit at a governance level, understanding what conversations have been had between different departments and the iwi partnership team. So we probably need to clarify that. But yeah, if you could get in touch with me offline, Chris, that would be awesome.
Thank you.
So thank you, Kim. If you look at our recommendation number D, it relates to going to TWOC at the end of October. I'm just wondering, as you're online, whether you've got some thoughts about maybe rewording that or how we manage that.
Yeah, I think we should leave it in there for now, because taking it out and rewording it might cause delays. It's fine to go there, but we just need to work better on, and what I will probably do is take this offline and say, look, this report is coming, but we're also working behind the scenes with Chris and Hunter as well. So I think this is a huge kaupapa for Māori, huge. And it's pretty much everything that we think about. It's our number one priority. So I think the faster we can get it in front of TWOC and make it known to the governance group, the better. Happy for that recommendation to go through. Just want to give them some background that those conversations are happening in the background rather than put any kind of delay. So absolutely happy for that recommendation as it stands.
Thank you, Kim, for that, your comments on that. So I just want to check, Mr. Black online, apparently your hand is still up. I'm just wondering whether you have a supplementary question or whether you don't.
Just a very quick question on that. One thing I forgot my other questions. Currently, our state of happiness is based on GDP. So I was just wondering, as part of this framework, are we going to look at adopting maybe some sort of other measure of sustainability, happiness, and environment?
We will be coming back to talk more about our entire suite of measures related to our outcomes to make sure that we have agreement that we're focused on the right things. I'm going to say from an economic development perspective, I think GDP is a common measure, not necessarily to say that it's a measure of happiness and satisfaction. So there may be other measures that we also want to include, but it will be making sure we've got the right balance across all of our sort of strategies and focus and our outcomes framework.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. So I have a couple of questions. And I suppose they're more process type ones. So if we go to page 7, under the options it's option A and option B about whether we actually develop these strategies separately or together. And that is something that no one has really brought up, but just to actually have some comments about that. And is this the time when we should actually be making that decision as part of the recommendations?
I think we have at the moment suggested that we are progressing them separately so that we can unpack to a greater degree of detail in both spaces. When we get to our final strategies, if we get to a position next year that we say, actually, after undertaking all this work, we think they should be combined, there'll be a further period of time where we can talk about that. At this stage, though, we felt having a separate conversation made it, provided the opportunity to more meaningfully unpack those respective areas. So at this stage, as we're developing what we'll call our direction of travel documents, we have put in the recommendation option A. That's what's been taken forward, that we're developing the high-level strategies with separate action plans at this stage. We will note that we'll be coming back, obviously, as we develop the material and more fully to see how that lands.
Thank you, Chris. So my other question relates to the timeline, which is on page 24. Here we are, page 24. So on here, we are basically starting this process now, and we're going to be adopting both the strategies in May or June next year. So there's a few little questions I've got on here with it, which are probably bigger questions, but so we've just mentioned, you've just mentioned that the action plan will come out of the strategy. There's actually no timeline for that, or for them, because there's two strategies we're talking at here.
Oh, right,
so
okay.
I suppose actually I could also just add to that, obviously the financial side of things have come into this, so that's not actually necessarily going to be landed before, well, it won't be landed before our long-term plan process starts, which has already started.
So I might say two things. Our view is that we want to set out with the strategy and the pathways that link to that strategy, which will form part of that, by May, June. What falls out after we land the strategy is our implementation and action plans. We are acknowledging, because we're concurrently doing work, that some implementation plans exist and we're doing some things. So we haven't stopped the work we're doing to do a strategy and then start again. We're continuing. So some implementation plans are coming through to you. We do acknowledge that once we have the strategy in place, we'll be doing a piece to align those things and then be looking to come back to you with other action plans or implementation actions that need to be put in place. So this isn't a linear process where we go A, B, C, D. It's more a squiggly process because we're acknowledging we're not starting from ground zero. So I know that sounds possibly a little chaotic, but it's where we find ourselves. And so what we're trying to do is, as Doug said earlier, put the umbrella out and then look at how things line up to that and then talk about the gaps and what next. One of the areas that we know we're definitely going to be putting a plan in place is in recovery, and we are talking to you about that. So that's an example of somewhere where we are starting progress work. We know we need to do things, but we'll also need to make sure that lines up to the strategies as they're being developed. Around the finances, I just want to reiterate that we're acknowledging the fact that we're concurrently doing things as well as developing things. So we are putting placeholders in. So where we've got actions underway, so if we might, you are talking about waste minimisation today, we're already doing work around specific things that we're going to deliver, and we'll be putting that into our LTP, making sure that we've got the right things for that. We are going to put some placeholders in to acknowledge that through this process, some things will pop out. There'll be a placeholder. If you might think of it as a contingency that we're putting in to go, we know that we will drive some things that you agree to do. Those will come through the action plans. We will essentially come back to you and talk about how we'd best use that contingency that we're putting in. They're not massive contingencies because some of the work we're doing is to develop things, but we're definitely putting those placeholders in.
I thank you for that, Chris. So, still on that same page, my other one relates to, I suppose, the environment timeline process. So obviously we have a think tank that's been set up for climate and resilience. It's not clear to me how the strategy for the environment is going to be developed.
If you're talking about the consultation and whether we'd have a think tank or similar, right, okay. I think part of the reason we felt we could push ahead with a climate think tank is because there's been a lot of engagement, there's been prior surveys of the community, and it feels like there's an intention to push forward. We're very mindful of the role that our iwi partners have in the environment space and think it's important to have a conversation with them about how we might be working in the space together before we determine if there's additional or further forums to put in place. I'm also mindful that we have some existing forums like the Kapiti Whaitua in the water space. And so it might be looking and coming back to the table of where are there gaps where we think we need more conversation. Even I'm thinking about land use. Through PC2, we have been talking about the idea of urban panels being established. So I just would like to come back and look at what is already coming through in some of these spaces and where are the gaps before we decide we want to establish an additional panel. So we can come back to you post the discussion with iwi and say, from their perspective, this is how they've seen that platform as well. We think that's a critical step.
So thank you for that. So I'm just wondering, in terms of developing that process, that the timing, so I think at the end of October, this is all going to start happening. And so between now and then, some of those thoughts, developing some of the scope, for example, that's on page 20, there's actually probably quite a lot of work in there because it's quite diverse.
I think in all reality, in the background, we are developing more material to be able to test. The pace at which we're working and we've committed to being able to land, as I've called it, the straw person in a document called Direction of Travel, is so that we can start to consult and engage with the community on some of the key material, not the document itself, that will come out of that consultation. So we are running conversations with you and developing things in the background to make sure we can keep the pace going And it may be that as we engage with our iwi partners, particularly in the environmental space, we need to make sure that we're considering the input of additional pieces into this. I do keep bringing up the Kapiti Whaitua, but I think it's an obvious one that has a timeline and time frame to it too. We want to enable space for that to be dropping and informing some of the work we do. And it might be that we need to say in our strategy that there's going to be key points in time where additional material will come onto the table, and we'll be looking at how we bring that. And maybe it is a slight update or iteration change to our strategy to pick up those points. So we'd come back and talk to you about that in our next phase of discussion, essentially.
Thank you again, Chris. So another, I suppose, thought that's been going through my mind is that this process is very council-centric, whereas we have a whole, we have 40 to 50,000 people in our community, and for us to be successful to make changes, we need to have our community on board as well. And I suppose I'm wondering, how do we go about doing that? We can lead by example, but, we have got to get action happening in our communities as well. I think Simon made the comment about we're still importing polystyrene, for example. That happens because there's a market, and that market is made by individuals and possibly corporates as well. But how can we actually affect any of these changes on the ground, actually in individual houses?
I think I'm going to make an overall comment that, and I think community board member Olsen had mentioned social development and the idea that obviously economic, social and environmental are three factors that come together. Around business, we're going to work through, and with the EDKB, we're going to work with the ecosystem that's been put in place to make sure that we're talking to business about opportunities. And we are doing that already. We'll just continue to do that and focus and target the conversation. We heard this morning from maybe that we might be able to go into schools and talk about what action we can take, with youth. I think it will be working through some of the mechanisms we already have. So we have a number of advisory groups that we're starting to try and pull into some of these conversations so that we're able to reach into the community. We also have the new engagement hub. So we'll be looking to continue conversations into the community, giving people the opportunity to have their say and voice and get involved in different ways. I think also part of this, and earlier I think Simon had asked about education and awareness. That will be an important factor of work that we progress. That will be coming to the table so that you can have a think about how do we actually push into the community a bit further. Our view is people like the think tank and our iwi partners will be really useful mechanisms for us to think about getting different views on the table for what else do we need to do. So I think it'll be part of our implementation.
Thank you, Chris. So that's been a really, I suppose, wide-ranging conversation from elected members and from staff, and thank you for that. So what we're going to...
Yeah, so just one comment if I may, Madam Chair. Yes. Thank you. Just to come back on that, your community point around, I think we've got a pretty strong mandate from the community survey as well. We've got 600 odd people have come back and said 75% of them are very worried or concerned about climate change. 2/3 are up for us setting a district-wide target. So I think we can reflect that, and we will reflect that in the strategy to show that the community is on board, or we are talking to our community and we're reflecting what they're telling us, and that's a really key point I just want to make for our approach for the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Doug. So time is marching on, and I suppose now I will go back to page 6 in our report there where we have 6 recommendations. So I would like a mover for those recommendations, please. Thank you, Councillor Coe. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Hanford. Any discussion? Thank you. All those in favour of the six recommendations, say aye. Those against? The motions are covered, are passed, thank you. And yes, thank you very much for the staff, for the very detailed presentations that you've provided to us and responses to the very detailed questions that we've been given today. This is a really important journey that we're about to undertake, and but I think you're hearing the message that we're wanting it to occur quicker than slower, but obviously there are some costs and that will have to be managed. So thank you very much. So that ends that update. We actually have a number of others, but I think we've been going for a number of hours, a fairly intense process, so we'll take a 10-minute coffee break. Thank you.